Jamie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got the dark eyes, and then she lost a tooth. They were all at my house last week. She's got the.
I feel like we're late whenever you're already here.
Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah.
So how many grades does that make for you?
When the new one comes, it'll be 20.
Well, there's a lot of late people today.
Wasn't hard on me at all. This is the one I love, her little one.
Oh,
She's the middle child now, but of course she's.
right. I have an Evelyn.
Do you?
Yeah, I have an Evelyn. Yeah.
Some of those names are funny.
Yeah, she's beautiful. Evelyn and Mom and Dad and the brothers went to the beach last weekend to see Christine and Dan.
Oh,
And I have this big coffee table and, anyway, they got done eating, she went over and somehow she hit the corner side of the coffee table and it just got bigger and bigger. So they called the emergency, there's no hospital in Ocean Shores, you have to go to Aberdeen.
yeah.
But there's emergency, so the emergency, she said 3 paramedics showed up and they tested her out. Didn't feel like anything was broken, it's just a really bad bruise.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't feel she had to go in, just, watch her and
Yeah.
she's unbelievable. This kid climbs on tables, chairs, and up and the boys were never like that.
I know, some kids are.
Yeah.
I don't know how many we're going to get today because I know Mike and Brenda are in Gig Harbor.
Thank you. Ruby's gone.
Ruby's gone. I don't know if Paul and Andrea are here or not. But Cynthia. Matt's here. Yeah, he's coming. But
We'll start.
we'll do with what we got. Yeah, and whoever shows up, shows up. Grab a Bible if you get a chance, and or if you would like one. We'll get to this in a second. I'll say the same thing in worship, but we've got a lot of folks right now that are dealing with health stuff. So Evelyn Knudsen, Pat and I were talking about. Evelyn was in the hospital and has declining health, whatever that means in the long term. Dorothy Wilsey is in the hospital. I saw her on Friday. Spirits are high, but got a lot of health problems in front of her. Ralph McKenzie is going off his meds for Parkinson's, so he's effectively going on hospice palliative care. And Ralph Toomey as well too. And then I'm forgetting there's one more. It'll come to me. Anyways, just pray for people this week. If you got free moment and you want to get out of the house and go visit somebody, I've got a list of folks that could use a conversation or a smile. But, stopped presenting. I don't know. PowerPoint is being funky today. There, now it's working. Okay. Let me get my brain rolling here. I didn't drink enough coffee yet. Yesterday, I did yard work all day. My neighbor rented a lawn aerator, and so he said, I'm using it. He's got like half the lawn I do, and he said if I wanted to borrow it after, good. So I did that, but I really wanted to do it fast so that we could take it back so we didn't have to pay for extra hours or anything like that. So those lawn aerators are heavy. They're super heavy. They actually have weights in them to make sure that they puncture the soil in. So I did yard work from pretty much 9 in the morning, 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and then I played pickleball for 2 hours. So I'm tired. I'm tired. My legs are sore. My back's sore. Everything's sore. I feel old. Anyways, give me a moment to get my creative juices flowing. So I'm thinking about the pace of this. I think we're probably going to wrap up this study in 2 to 3 weeks. I think we'll be done before the end of October, which works out pretty well because I want to do a transition at that point. And what we'll probably end up doing is another 4-ish week study from Halloween-ish to the first Sunday in Advent, and then we'll either do a separate study for Advent, or we'll just end like 2 weeks before Christmas, which is what we normally do, and then start back up again in January. But we've gone through the Old Testament texts, and what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what we read last week, and then the next steps are we're going to look at these couple of texts that I had listed from the New Testament, and we're also going to take a look at some stories in Acts, which speak to the same idea. But starting out, first question to you, and we can cycle back through these texts to brush up your memory. What do you hear, at least, from what we've read, what do you hear the Hebrew Bible saying, or the Old Testament saying, how we should behave with regards to strangers, foreigners, immigrants, refugees? What do you hear?
Welcome them.
Welcome them. Yeah. Yeah. And what are the specifics of that? Like, what does that include? What is
Food, feed them.
Sure.
Feed them clothes.
Yeah.
Give them clothes. I mean, we're not strangers. We're all children of God.
And that's really kind of the profound piece of this, is that the texts that we looked at, including those from Exodus, are really intentional about commanding the Hebrew people, the Israelites, to treat strangers as they would citizens. I mean, and citizen doesn't. Yeah, you treat them no differently than you would a native of the land, is the phrase that's used here.
But they weren't perfect either, because I already
Absolutely.
remember what Sue said, there she is. Because the family, husband and wife came into the town at night and knocked on a door. They accepted the man, but not the woman or the kids, and they had to stay outside.
Well, it depends. So, with regards to that, the reality is the ancient world, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, but including the Hebrew people, was a patriarchal society. And what that meant in terms of civic rights and responsibilities was that from a modern perspective, this is, quote unquote barbaric, but, effectively women and children were the property of the man. And again, it's complicated, because when we think of property, and rightly so, it's dehumanizing. Yeah, it's all about value. But
It was a man's world.
it wasn't. To a certain extent, it was. But it's more complex than that. Insofar as that, even the ancient concepts of what property was are vastly different from our modern concept. Because in our modern world, I own property. Well, I own a third of it. The bank owns the other 2/3, right? But I own property. There is land that is mine. I have a house that is mine, and the law protects that for me. Okay. By and large, for the majority of human history, you only owned what you could physically protect, right? There was no separate legal agency guaranteeing your rights towards whatever you had. So when we talk about women and children being property, it's complicated, because it's not just about ownership. It's about the idea of these are people that fall under your protection. Which is when you talk about slaves in the ancient world, that same thing holds true, which is, slaves are people who have essentially sold their labor for housing and food, but that also guarantees responsibility of the owner towards that person. And again, I'm in no way, shape, or form, trying to apologize or justify slavery or ownership of human beings in any form, but I just want us to understand that that's a little bit more of a complex notion than from our modern perspective. Which, in a lot of ways, our modern perspective is kind of screwed up. When you talk about ownership of things, I shouldn't say screwed up. just understand that our modern perspective is unique. Talk to somebody, which Jamie McCara let me know this morning that Tuesday, I'd not heard of this, Tuesday is Orange Shirt Day. Has anybody else heard of this? It's a day recognizing those indigenous children who were basically forced into boarding schools and disappeared. There's a lot of days to remember nowadays, but it's not a bad idea, especially considering the role of, Protestant churches in those things, including Catholic churches as well too, in having those boarding schools. But talk to an indigenous person about the idea of, land ownership. And the concept is vastly, vastly different. Anyways, where I was going with this is when you talk, while that may be true, the idea that hospitality was offered to the man, it didn't mean that the women and children were left outside. But it meant that the person that was recognized as having having quote unquote rights in those ancient societies was through the man, right?
So the culture is really important.
Culture and context is really important. And again, this is the tough part, because there's even more things that complicate when we talk about the voice of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible regarding the stranger, the foreigner, the immigrant, or the refugee, which is that, at the end of the book of Numbers, or of Deuteronomy, we have the command given to the Hebrew people to essentially commit genocide on the people that are living in the land of Canaan. And they get punished because they don't kill everybody that's there, because they fail to essentially wipe the slate clean, So this is, again, the tough thing about reading Scripture is how do you hold that up against, you shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land in Egypt. How do you reconcile those two ideas? Because on one hand, we have a litany of texts here that are encouraging us to treat, these folks, strangers, foreigners, aliens, refugees, immigrants, etc., as if they are native born, right? In other words, the law, this is the law, is very explicit. This is the law of Moses, very explicit that there are not two rules. There's not a rule for the native born and the resident alien. Everybody is treated the same. And, the further texts that we read get even more explicit in that, especially, this idea that, I can't remember which one it was we were reading. Was it from Zechariah? No, it wasn't. It was in Deuteronomy. No, I'm not going to skim through it, but, is that holding the way that we treat the stranger as a benchmark against how you treat family members who have, fallen on hard times. In other words, you've got the law exhorting people to treat your family members who have fallen on hard times as well as you treat the resident alien. In other words, there's this benchmark for this is how you treat people, and you should treat your family members at least as well as that. Indicating, which is fascinating to me, because where my brain automatically goes is wondering what was going on in their society at that time that law was so important. That the law of Moses makes a statement regarding that. But yeah, so this is the biblical witness. Not just encourages, but commands us to welcome the stranger. And the operative question is, what does that mean? What does that look like? Offering shelter and food, that's part of it. But a lot of it, we're thinking of stranger or foreigner as somebody in need, which may be true, but with regards to the law of Moses, by and large, these are people who are living and working and thriving in Israel. And so this is less about caring for the unfortunate and more about how you treat people whether they are native born, according to this language, in modern parlance we'd say citizens, or whether they are immigrants. And the Old Testament witness encourages us over and over and over again, you treat them the same. You don't make two rules. So, here's an interesting question. Is that how it functions in America in 2025? Do we treat...
I don't know if anybody I know is an immigrant or not.
If they're what?
If they're an immigrant or not.
Well, and this is what we were talking about last week too, is that, if you trace our generations back a couple, we're all immigrants. I'm only 3 generations removed from people living in Norway, or 4 generations. I don't have to trace my family tree back that far to find people that weren't native born, to use that language. And of course, it's impossible not to dip our toes into the current political situation, but the birthright citizenship, in other words, being native born, literally is something that the current administration is wanting to undo. Linda.
Just for personal experience, with a friend, a very good friend, who came from Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, he was a very educated man and had a teaching degree.
Yeah.
When he came to the United States, the only job he could find was being a warehouse man because of his language barrier.
Yeah.
And so we worked on his language.
Yeah.
But he enjoyed being a warehouse.
Sure.
And but it wasn't what he was trained to be. But because nobody wanted to accept the fact that he didn't speak good English.
That happens more often than you think, and even with people who are moving from quote unquote, developed first world countries, the U.S. has a complicated history with accepting foreign degrees. That's a different thing. But I'll tell you, my wife, who has her doctorate, had struggled with that, because in France the process for becoming an engineer is a lot more rigorous than the U.S. Insofar as that, when she decided she was going to be as a senior in high school, you take what's called baccalaureate, which is confusing because baccalaureate is the word that we use to describe the church service for people that are graduating. In France, it's the name of the test that you take as a senior, and that test score is the determiner for a lot of things, including which schools you can get into. So in France, higher education is funded by the government by and large. So she tested high enough to get into a chemical engineering school. It was a what we would refer to as an undergraduate degree, but it was a little bit more complicated than that. For her, it was called a pre-engineering program. So she went 2 years to the preparatory school and then 2 years to her engineering school. But she didn't have to pay a dime because she tested high enough. You could still be an engineer if you didn't test high enough. You just have to pay a private school to do that. Well, when she transferred over to Georgia Tech to pursue her master's, there was a lot of confusion around her 2 separate 2-year degrees. And again, this is the American bias. We think we're the best at everything. One of the things that I, foot and mouth, is that when we first started dating, I'd been a pastor for 6 years at that point. And I said, well, I'm a chemical engineer too. She said, well, no, you were. I said, well, I got a bachelor's degree. And I said, I'm impressed that you've got a doctorate. That must have been really hard. And she said, no, the doctorate was easy. my undergrad degree was hard. This was just doing busy work. So, anyways, I got off on a tangent there, but there are so many different complications and barriers that not necessarily intentionally, but just because of the complications of society get thrown in the way of people immigrating, and language being one of those. And I would argue that these same complications existed in the ancient world.
Oh, sure.
In fact, they may have been exacerbated in some way, which is why, in my opinion, these laws exist, is because the people of Israel, well, they're not Israel yet, but the Hebrew people needed to hear that you need to treat them the same way as you treat us, to the point where you don't distinguish between the two. In fact, again, we are reading through the Deuteronomic law here. The only thing different is whether you're circumcised or not, and whether you're participating in the faith of Israel. But whether you do or don't, you're still supposed to be treated the same, right? The law is not different for you. So I'll go back to my question: is that true in our modern context?
What I was thinking was that, in Israel, did they have small communities where people live next to each other?
Yeah.
And then it's a little different when you're out in the country. And
It is.
you're here, and another person's here, another person's there.
Yep.
And,
Well, and by and large, communities were just smaller. Whether you were living in an urban urban and rural is a distinction that's a very modern distinction. But whether you were living in the city or whether your property was out of the boundaries of the city, yeah.
well, you wonder, if the person expects no good from that person you don't recognize.
Yeah.
Or that person doesn't know what to expect and welcomes them, it's what's in the person's attitude toward that person.
It is, isn't it?
Hospitable or not.
And it's an interesting question from the perspective of, if you are somebody foreign born traveling in the United States, how would you expect to be received depending on where you are? And unfortunately, I think one of the stereotypes is that rural America would be inhospitable, especially because of the political language you have nowadays. At least in my time traveling with Elen, which, again, she's got white skin. I don't know if that makes a difference, but it might. That we've had the opposite experience, which is by and large, people are genuinely curious, but open and welcoming. And I'll say, as somebody who grew up in a rural setting, my experience is that folks in small towns are by and large more hospitable than people in urban areas. But it's complicated. There's different social contracts there.
Right. The other thing is, if a stranger looks just like you,
Then it's easy.
it's
Easier.
Easier. Right?
Yeah. It's when the skin tone is different, or they dress different, or behave different, speak different, that it gets harder. And, one of the things that I would be curious about, and I mentioned this before, is how much of that was present in this ancient world, right? In terms of the looking different, speaking different, dressing different. Were those things easily noticeable between cultural groups or not? I think probably yes, but maybe to a lesser degree. I have no idea. But I think the same thing holds true.
Well, I think it's also a complication these days because of the homeless and
Mhm.
houseless people.
Yep.
There's a distinction, and a lot of people look at everybody that lives on the street as being homeless. Well, they're not. They're families that are living because they can't afford a place to
Yeah.
live. So they're houseless. They're not homeless.
Yeah, and this is going to be something I talk about in the sermon today because it's very close to the gospel text. But what we're talking about there is the inherent equality of people, or the inherent value of people. Are you less of a human being because you're poor? And how do we treat folks? And this is and again, what we're talking about here. Keep in mind that in all of these texts, the three categories of people that are linked together are the stranger, the widow, and the orphan, and the poor. But widow and orphan are falling into that same category because widows and orphans in this ancient world were unprotected and they were very vulnerable because property value was passed through male inheritance. So if you're a widow, doesn't work. If you're an orphan, there's no inheritance, right? So these three categories of people, four, including the poor, are the three categories of people that would have been the most vulnerable in this ancient world, and could fall through the holes, as we say. But from a modern perspective, who are the folks that fall through the gaps in our modern world? Yeah, folks that lose their housing, that's definitely one. Who else falls through the gaps? Mental health, people with mental health issues. Addiction, perhaps. Orphans.
Physical, not
physically, physically, developmentally disabled folks, or intellectually disabled folks. I mean, and again, the same holds true. Widows, I would argue, especially widows whose husband passes away and they lose streams of income that were accessible to them. This is a very vulnerable population in our areas. There, I mean, both men and women who are trying to figure out where they're going to live next because they can't afford anything anymore. Cost of living has gone up.
I went to the powwow one time and I learned what it was like to be invisible.
Yeah.
Because nobody, heads turned and then they'd turn back away. And wasn't welcome.
Because you didn't look like.
Where was that one?
Salilo. Powwow.
Oh, yeah.
Has anybody else had that experience of being the invisible one or being the stranger? Have you ever had the experience of being the stranger?
Oh, yeah. Well, I went to whatever the high holiday Muslim was. I was invited by a Muslim friend to go. There were several of us that were invited.
Yeah.
And we stood out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, sure. What was the experience?
It was very, very enjoyable. Very enjoyable.
The family you were with was hospitable.
Yes.
And that's this is kind of the
And they invited us to come.
this fascinating we use this term hospitable. What does it mean to offer hospitality? And that's what it looks like, right? Inviting people to participate. Yeah. Has anybody had the experience of being the newly partnered or married visiting their spouse's family? The first time I visited a Lens family in France, I didn't speak the language. Believe it or not, I didn't look like them. I didn't dress like French people. Yeah, I did not. And Len reminded me of it.
I had a nephew who got engaged to a girl here, and then they went back to Montana to meet her parents, and when they came back, they were no longer engaged because it was just
Too much. Fair enough. Better to find out then than after you get married, I suppose. I'm going to jump back to my previous question. I don't mean to belabor the point, but it bears thinking about. But just according to our laws, not even how they're being interpreted right now, how do our laws protect or treat immigrants, refugees,
Well, and
strangers?
speaking of being hospitable, the outdoor cupboard is empty.
It's not for lack of being filled.
I know.
It gets filled up and emptied as soon as next
I
day.
always notice it.
Yeah.
I truly noticed because I'm in charge of it.
Yeah. It's not for lack of providing supplies. The confirmation kids are going to do a can drive around Thanksgiving, so we'll hopefully create a stockpile of foodstuffs.
Well, and bless Sarah and Bob, who every Sunday bring
Yeah.
at least 2 bags of groceries and put it in there.
Yeah.
But by Sunday afternoon, it's gone.
Yeah.
And don't know if it's really people who need it or just use it as a grocery store.
Yeah, you can only assume it is, otherwise you drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, it gets filled up, and by the end of the day, it's gone again.
So you welcome the stranger.
It's somebody that's supposed to be speaking about climate change after a church service. Wrong church.
I saw him again and
Oh, okay.
I should go find Sue got up and I go, good, she did.
Thank you, Susan. But go back, and again, this is not a question where I'm trying to get us to launch into talking about our current political furor, but how educated are we about immigration law in the U.S.? Do you understand? And again, I'm a little bit uniquely positioned here, having a wife that is currently not a citizen, sits in the United States, but do our laws represent or resemble those ancient laws? Cynthia?
I have a friend has a longtime friend who lived in the U.S. for a long time.
Yeah.
Icelandic nationality originally, but English citizen who has a permanent green card.
Yep.
And the last time she came into the country, they told her she needed to renew it.
Yeah.
And the law is,
That's a permanent green card. Yeah.
and traditionally, when they change laws, the people who are grandfathered in under the old laws,
Yeah.
their law doesn't change.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, well, and it's the same thing, people who are in the asylum process, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're kicked out because they say, well, it's against the law to be in asylum. Well, they don't say it that way, but it's though they're treating people in the legal process as illegal because they're not here, they didn't come
Yeah.
in the same way. And it's very unsettling to hear about, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And Matt.
I think that, you know, one of the troubling parts of what we're going through right now with this, all this coverage and all of the, you know, attention being paid to people who are being deported.
Yeah.
There's a couple issues here. Is that, you know, the way the ICE people comport themselves with the
Yeah.
masks and stuff.
Yeah.
In my opinion, having been a federal employee,
Yeah.
Army soldier for 5 years, I don't think that serves them well in the long run. As opposed to say our Milwaukie police or Portland police, who are very professional, and every dealing I've ever had with a local police officer has been fine. So that's part of the problem. But the other problem is that, you know, when I hear one of these stories about some dad, say, being deported and his family being left here, I sit here and say, I really don't know what the laws are and what the deal is. Why did this guy get picked up, you know? As opposed to, you know, on our block in northeast Portland, we have 3 families who are immigrant families.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hope they're okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you got these 2 little boys next door, the dad's from England, the mom's from Spain. They're here on some sort of authorization,
Yeah.
I'm sure. But I kind of worry about it.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, what would happen if some masked guys showed up someday, you know, and scooped them up, you know?
And
So
this
I
is,
don't know what to think about it.
it's
you know what I
tough,
mean?
isn't it? And
Yeah.
and here's the thing. If we talk about legality from this perspective, the law of Moses leaves a lot of room for, you know, in terms of, you know, the legality of an immigrant, right? In fact, you know, and again, this is the difference in societies. The world has changed. Is that, you know, again, I'm repeating myself, but there's no border patrol. You know, there's no immigration enforcement in the ancient world. It's a lot looser than that. So and the reason I bring this up is it's easy to say, well, this tells us to do this, and then look at our modern setting and say we're not doing that, right? It's easy to do that but the problem is that the worlds are so different. You know, and here's the issue with immigration, and I'm not an expert, but I have listened to a couple of experts. In fact, more than 4 years ago, I attended a conference. I think it's still happening. It's the Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon puts it on every year. This is during the first Trump administration when there was similar questions around immigration, and I got to participate in a seminar that was a lecture by 2 immigration lawyers, and it was really fascinating because they essentially walked through what the process looks like. And here's the problem: is that by and large, immigration law in the United States is very fungible. Insofar as that there are laws, you know, and this is it, right? You know, it's the protected statuses. If you are a citizen of the United States of America, that guarantees the rights and privileges, you know, as established by our Constitution. And then we have, you know, visas, which are the ways in which you visit America legally. And visas, by and large, they are temporary stays that you can extend. So you can get student visas, work visas, travel visas. Has anybody in here, you know, besides getting a travel visa, has anybody here had to get a visa to visit before?
When we went to Russia.
Yeah.
We had to get a visa, and you better get out the day that your visa expires.
Yes.
Otherwise you're gonna be in
Yes. Deep doo-doo. Yeah. So there are visas, right, which are temporary stay. And then somebody already brought it up. There are what we call green cards, which are, you know, permanent resident, which that is, by and large, the closest analog to what we're talking about when we're talking about resident aliens, is green card holders. If we're being legalistic about it. You could argue that, visa as well, because you would have in the ancient world, you would have merchants or just travelers that are passing through, and I would guess, this is an assumption on my part, that these commands held true for those folks as well, not just the folks that are living permanently, but folks passing through would, they follow the same laws as you do. But this is why it's so tough. Did anybody see in the news about the superintendent of that school district in Iowa that got arrested by ICE? Well, there was a lot of confusion around why he got picked up, and the original thing that was out in the news was that he was at a site where some children were going to be picked up by ICE, and the guess was that he got arrested for interfering. Well, now the administration is saying that he had gone past his go home order, okay, which is really confusing because that immediately sounds like, well, he overstayed. And here's the tough thing, is that the reality is that the majority of immigrants in the United States are folks who have come in on a visa and have overstayed that visa and then apply after the fact. And that's tough. We also have a lot, when they talk about undocumented, these are folks that are just crossing the border coming into the U.S. But one of the things is that by and large, with some very few exceptions, the majority of folks end up applying for getting into the citizenship process. And the way that it is operated in the U.S. for a long time, and for right or wrong, is that our government has chosen to allow that to happen. In other words, they have allowed people who were participating in the process to remain in the United States, especially, this is all based on precedent, especially if they are working, paying taxes, if they have family, if they have things that are anchoring them here. And there's all kinds of different, pathways too. There's refugee status, which is, there are, two ways that happens. More than two, but it boils down to two. One is that there is a certain number of refugees that the United States of America chooses to bring over each year. That number is almost zero right now because of the current administration. But that's what Lutheran Community Services Northwest does. That is one of their big roles, is that there are people in refugee camps in different places in the world that have applied for and have been accepted into the process of being repatriated in the United States. And they wait there until they get approved, and then they fly over. And what LCS Northwest does is they make sure that there's some place for them to be when they get here. So LCS Northwest houses people, does job training, language training, and essentially is saying, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that you can succeed in our society. Okay? It's a big, big piece of it. Right now, there's nobody coming over. And that was one of the big pieces, and that's why, LCS Northwest, as well as a bunch of other institutions, sued the Trump administration and won, but still have not received the money that they're legally obligated to receive. It's a different story, was that, essentially the United States government makes contracts with these different agencies because of their obligation to bring in refugees. But then there's also asylum seekers. And this is folks that either show up at our borders or come on a visa and stay here, and then approach immigration and custom enforcement and claim asylum status. And that is essentially saying, I have reason to fear for my well-being in the place in which I previously resided, and so I'm asking the United States to open its arms to me, okay? And here's the thing, here's what's going on right now, as I understand it, and again, I'm not an expert, is that there is almost no consistent enforcement of anything anymore. Is that it really seems haphazard as to who immigration and customs enforcement is choosing to deport. And by and large, it seems to be punitive, which is that they're picking out people, again, they're profiling. There was just a legal court case where it's going to get challenged, where a judge said it's okay to profile people based off of skin color and other things, which thought we had a civil rights case that knocked that one down. But by and large, that's where a lot of the fear is right now, is that it used to be that you knew that the United States government chose to do these things, right? And wouldn't it be nice if everybody could show up at the border and apply for citizenship, and there'd be a place for them to stay until they were accepted in, and then they could cross the border. But if any of you have families, it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And I will say something too, which is, this is what makes me proud to be, a citizen of the United States of America. By and large, over the history of our country, we have been one of the few countries that has opened our arms to people. Because try to apply for citizenship in like Norway or Finland or Sweden or one of the Western European countries. No, it's not an easy process, despite what many Americans think. This is what I get a kick out. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit on a rant right now, but especially with people that are displeased with the current administration, they're like, I'm getting out of here. I'm like, well, it's not as easy as it sounds, because believe it or not, most countries aren't going to allow you to even get a long-term visa there unless you can fulfill several requirements, which is, getting a job, having enough finances to stay there for a duration, having language affinity. There are so many things that, most developed countries, have. By and large, our immigration policy up until recently has been, and I don't want to use the word progressive, but it's been one of the more flexible in that, we have been holding true to the promise of the, the Statue of Liberty, give us your poor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's tough about right now. And it was the same thing that in the first Trump administration, which is that it was more than anything, it was confusing, because even immigration lawyers didn't know what the federal administration was going to choose to do one day or the next. And for people whose livelihoods depend on being able to work through these processes, who may own homes in the United States, who have families and jobs and livelihoods and are paying taxes, and by and large are not any different from a naturalized citizen of the U.S., at least in terms of how they behave and participate in our society, it's terrifying to think that somebody in a mask could show up at your front door and drag you out of your house by gunpoint and deport you to a country that you don't even know, right? Because your mom or your dad was not born in the United States of America. That's scary, right? And again, I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but and I'll tell you, as the husband of a woman who does not have her citizenship, it causes us anxiety, because the only thing that protects her is the idea that the United States government honors its commitments to green card holders. And like your friend who was told she had to renew her green card to come back into the U.S., I'm afraid that if Elaine travels overseas, and we're looking to go to France in November, that the federal government might come up with a reason to not allow her back in the country. By and large, that chance is very small. Elaine doesn't have any social media, so there's nothing to worry about there. She can't vote in any elections, so she didn't vote for the wrong guy at any point in time. But just the idea that possibility exists for other people does not make me feel good, right? Sorry, I'm done with my rant. Susan.
What's so ironic is that many people who have been here for years, immigrants who have been here for years but are not citizens,
Yeah.
are actually paying taxes to
Yes.
the government and not getting any social security or anything like that.
Yes.
And so they have tax ID numbers.
They do.
Use a fake social security number. And, with the IRS sharing or having to share information with the U.S. government, these people are going to be found, tracked down, and deported.
Elaine has a social security number.
Right.
Yeah, she has a social security number and a tax ID. She pays taxes both to the U.S. government and to the French government because it's complicated.
A citizen of more than one country.
You can, in fact, Elaine can be a dual citizen of France and the U.S. I can be, but I'd have to live in France for a year. There's requirements for me to become a citizen of France.
Well, I think like everything, the devil is in the detail.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the problem, right?
And nobody is following the same thing.
And to be fair, and I'll stop with the not political stuff, but the government stuff. To be fair, those details are things that we should have been having conversations about for a long time, because realistically speaking, there should be a not set in stone, but a documented process that doesn't depend on the whims of our current government, right? We should have laws establishing, okay, you want to immigrate to the U.S., don't just come and overstay your visa. But then there needs to be a way that people can do that, because it's the thing is if the legal process, I'm getting on a pulpit here a little bit, but if legal process doesn't work, then people are going to do the illegal process, right? That's just the reality. Okay, I'm done with that. All right, sorry.
And we depend so much on the expertise of some of these foreigners coming in, and yet they're not respected for that, and that they don't renew their visa or whatever, and then they get arrested on the street and hauled away, and you don't know what happened to them.
And they're people. They're people just like you and me. Like, God bless my wife, she forgot to renew her passport, which is why we're waiting till the last minute to figure out when we're going to go to France this fall. And so she had, and again, for me, when I renew my passport, I go get a new picture from the post office, I send the paperwork in, and then I wait 6 weeks. Right? For her, she had to fly to San Francisco to go to the French consulate to renew her paperwork there. And of course, she's a French, so she has a French passport, but so she has to go there to do it, and then, it's quite complicated, actually. She was very stressed because the way in which these things get mailed to you, it has to go through FedEx, and FedEx is not the easiest. No, I'm not slandering FedEx, but it's not the easiest thing to navigate. Anyways, yeah, and people are people, right? We forget to do things, we procrastinate, we get comfortable, we yeah, I know I should have filled that out, but how many of you have let your car registration expire, right? Yeah.
We let our passports expire, and our granddaughter was on a rowing team
Yeah.
this last year, and was rowing in a regatta up in
Canada.
And we thought, oh, that's great, let's just drive up and watch her spend the night. Nope.
Nope.
No passports.
Oh.
So we had to go through the whole drill.
Yeah.
Go to the regatta.
Yeah. And so, that's one of the things that, I would also encourage you to think about when we think about people who, because, again, when you hear on the news, oh, they're expired, or they stayed past their send home date or anything like that, by and large, it just means that they are at a point in the process and are in a holding pattern. And, okay, this is the last thing I'm saying. One of the tough things right now, too, is that the federal administration's choices are so confusing that it slows things down significantly. This is, again, 6 years ago when I attended this, that was the number one thing that these immigration lawyers said. The most frustrating part of it is if there was some consistency in application of the law, that would, whether it's, punitive or whatever, okay, at least we know how to work, but it's been so wishy-washy back and forth that what used to take a month takes a year, right? And so you've got people who overstayed whatever, but only because they were in the process, but the process took longer than their documentation was allowed for. It's really tough. Okay. So I asked this question at the beginning. We got in a big tangent. I apologize, but whatever. So I asked the question, what does the Hebrew Bible encourage us to do? What are our moral and ethical obligations towards newcomers? And one of the interesting things to think about is, this idea of hospitality as ethical responsibility or ethical duty. It's something that we take for granted because we, as members of a community of faith, it's in our statement, right? We welcome all. We welcome all, regardless of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have a lot of conversations about what that actually means in terms of our actions. Right? What does it mean for us to welcome people? And, this is where it's fun to talk about, what happens when somebody of a different skin color or a different language or a different, cultural context, joins our community or comes into our space. How do we navigate that? And I think one of the worst things we can do is pretend that it's easy. I think that's one of the things that we do disservice to. It's like, oh, we welcome everybody. True. But it can be hard, right? When people have different expectations or different assumptions or different behaviors or, even speaking different languages, there are things that you have to navigate. So and I'm kind of putting words into our collective mouth here, but what that means for us is that we're willing to do the extra work. When we say we welcome all, we're willing to do the extra work to make it work, right? To make sure that...
In every church, they always say 20% of the people do 100% of the work.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and that can be a complicating factor as well, too. But, I mean, whether in this community or another, have you had an experience where where you had an individual or family, I mean, it doesn't have to be a church either, it could be work or whatnot, a community outside, that, began to participate or joined where there was not necessarily conflict, but there needed to be work done to make sure that they fit within the community. Anybody have an experience like that? Wayne?
Well, just the elephant in the room, the young lady that comes to church here,
Yeah.
different skin color,
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to go up and start a conversation.
Yeah. What is the barrier for you?
I don't know how to be hospitable.
Yeah.
It's hard to start a conversation without feeling like you're being nosy.
Yes.
What are your circumstances? Well, that's a very nosy
Well-
question. It's like asking, where are you from? What is your skin
Yeah.
color?
And it's so...
It's so, we're not experienced. I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tried to cultivate these certain things to
Yeah.
say, but you say the same thing week after week after
Yeah.
week. And it's challenging, I think.
Especially when it's something noticeable like skin color.
Yeah.
Because it's which one of these things is not like the others. It stands out in a crowd. And I don't know about you, but what I hear you saying and what I've experienced is I don't want to single them out.
Right.
Just because they obviously look different. I don't want to be that person. But I also don't want to be on the other end of it, which is I ignore them and pretend they don't exist. It's tough.
It's tough.
And that's another thing that I think is really important, is acknowledging that it is tough, right? That doing hospitality is a work in progress, and that you're going to screw up. You're absolutely going to screw up. You're going to make a faux pas. You're going to say something awkward. You might be too attentive or not attentive enough, and just embrace that.
And I think for some people have a gift for it,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
a lot of people don't like.
I understand.
Especially, I always blame my Scandinavian heritage, but.
I do too. I blame mine all the time. Linda, you're gonna.
Well, just as a greeter, acknowledging that it is difficult, because I try to, at least as people come in and say, well, are you visiting, or
Yeah.
you live around here? And some people are receptive to that, and some people are open, and then other people just clam up and say, no, I'm just here.
Yeah.
So, you gotta accept the fact that some people just don't want to talk.
Absolutely, and that's okay. And that's okay. I mean, I've had the opportunity to join several churches over the course of my lifetime, and it's been a different experience each time. Obviously, being a clergy member, being the pastor or the intern, has changed that. Obviously a different experience. But even before I did this, when I was moving around a lot, in college and afterwards, I was constantly, I never changed my membership from Lutheran, but I was constantly attending new churches depending on where I was at in college and work and all that stuff. And it was a different experience each time. And there were some very good experiences and some very not good experiences. And it spanned the gamut. I had one church where I showed up and I don't think anybody talked to me the entire 2 Sundays that I attended. I never went back again. And then I had another church where the moment I walked into the door, I felt like chum being thrown to the sharks. Where every woman over the age of 70 suddenly swarmed me. And I was assigned a guy to give me the full tour of the church, and I hadn't even had a cup of coffee yet. And I was like, too much. Too much. But it's tough, and I don't think we do ourselves justice when we portray it as being this, we just have to be welcoming, right? And the same holds true. And again, when we're talking about the biblical voice on how we treat the stranger, the assumption is that it's tough because otherwise these laws wouldn't exist, right? Otherwise these commands wouldn't be repeated and repeated and repeated, Because obviously the Hebrew people struggled with it in the same way that we struggle with it. And so I want to hold that up as well. And here's one of the things that I think is neat about the biblical witness is that hospitality represents a moral obligation, but it fosters justice and compassion. We find that in these texts, which is that you were a stranger, you were a stranger in the land of Egypt, therefore you should behave differently, or you should treat these folks. Is that it's all about that providing hospitality builds compassion. Has anybody had that experience of building compassion through either receiving or offering hospitality? Every Sunday. Yeah, every Sunday.
As a greeter, I learned.
Have you ever invited somebody over to your home that you weren't necessarily sure whether or not you enjoyed? Because your wife wanted to invite them over.
Yes.
Yeah, or your husband. Yeah. And sometimes we find ourselves experiencing more compassion. Sometimes we have our prejudices confirmed for us. But yeah, there's a friend of Len's that she knew when he worked at Intel, who is a wonderful man. But every time we have them over, I'm exhausted by the time he leaves, because the moment he walks through the door, and he has a family with him, by the way, a wife and 2 kids. And every time he comes over, the moment he walks to the door, he starts talking, and he doesn't stop talking until he leaves. And I'm exhausted by the end of it. So I'm like, we have to ration their visits. And they can come over maybe once or twice a year.
Well, along with that, they're challenging everything. They're questioning everything.
Absolutely.
And it's like they want to argue about stuff.
Yeah. It can be tough. It can be tough. Even people that have, and this is something that, and again, I've had an interesting perspective on getting to, know my French family as well too. It's just there's little things that are different that I've had to come to terms with. That in the end I acknowledge as being good, but at times have caused me frustration. And one of the things that's constantly a source of conflict with my family, my brother and my French wife, is that French people eat at like 7 or 8 o'clock. Americans eat at 5. And every time we're trying to coordinate dinner, Elaine's like, oh, I guess they eat early. I'm like, yes, as well as 95% of the people inhabiting the United States, according to your definition. But that's what hospitality is about. Community cohesion. This is for me one of the most important pieces, is that the biblical witness is advocating that welcoming strangers strengthens the social bonds of the community and promotes justice. Any experience of that? I think this is part of the DNA of the U.S., and our kids are coming, so I'll pause here in a second, is that, give me your poor, your tired, your etc. We, at least for most of our history, have acknowledged that has been a net good. All right. Good morning, Ellis. Do you have something to share with us?
Remember, Max is going to talk and you're going to hold it up. So today, for our younger kids at Sunday school, along with finishing up our Rocks service project, we also talked about a very important day that is coming up this week, and that day is Orange Shirt Day, to honor all of the Indigenous children who were taken from their families and put into the residential schools and basically were whitewashed. And Alice has a beautiful little drawing that she did. And do you want to tell them what your shirt says?
Every kid matters. You can speak any language you want. Hug.
So Tuesday is Orange Shirt Day, so please wear orange in honor of the Indigenous children who were taken away from their homes, placed in boarding schools. And it's a day of reconciliation, recognition, and honoring those children's lives.
Nice job.
So make sure to wear orange
That's
and
Tuesday.
tell your friends.
Now, is that a yearly?
Yes, it reason why the orange shirt is because when she went to her very first day of boarding school, her grandmother gave her a brand new orange shirt. But the people at the boarding school took it away, made them wear the uniform, and so that's always been something that's made her remember her time there.
I learned something new. I was not aware of that. So thank you, Alice, for sharing that with us. I learned something today. And yes, I love your drawing. It's wonderful.
And I'd like to say for the
Yeah, absolutely.
announcements.
Absolutely.
Ready?
All right, we're going to take a couple more minutes because I don't have any real rush to get there today. And this is just kind of recapping what we've talked about. Is that what does the biblical witness tell us? In other words, what does the law of Moses tell us? And it essentially boils down to two things. One is that the laws ensure that everyone is equal according to the law, right? Whether you're a native of the land or whether you're a resident alien, the law treats you the same. And again, this is a complicated one to apply to our modern context because in the ancient world, as I said, you had the resident alien, the person who was not from your tribe that was living in your town, and you had people passing through, right? You had visa holders. It's much more complicated in our modern system, but I would encourage you to imagine how we might apply the biblical witness to how we practice, welcoming to strangers in our modern, and it's complicated. But the other piece is that it's about inclusion of strangers as well too. It's not just about being treated equally. It is the idea that you are helping these people to become a part of your community, right? Not just that you're tolerating their presence there, but that you are making the effort, and this is what we talked about when we talked about hospitality, making the effort to make sure that they understand that they are a part of your community. They're not just a tolerated presence, right? And then here's the tough part, is that as we read in Zephaniah especially, is that there are consequences for when we don't do this, and some of them are divine. So like in Zephaniah, the voice of the prophet, the voice of God is pretty explicit that your inability to care for the stranger will lead to, at least from the ancient perspective, will lead to divine judgment. Which, again, for us as modern Protestants is a hard thing for us to tangle with. We don't like to think about the concept of divine punishment, and I would say there's a much more nuanced conversation there. But what is the purpose of punishment? Change behavior. That's it. To change behavior. It's not intended to be, and again, I'm being semantic. It's not intended to be punitive. It's not intended to just make people hurt because they did the wrong thing. As with many of you who raised children, you punished your children when they did wrong, not just because you were angry at them, but also because you wanted them to make different choices in the future, right? So when we hear the warning of divine punishment, as it is relayed to the people of Israel, it was less about you did wrong, I'm going to make you hurt. It was about I expect better of you. And of course, we talked about this a lot, but over and over and over again, especially after the reign of Solomon, the one thing that the kings of Israel failed to do was to care for the widow and the orphan and the stranger. And Zephaniah and Ezra are looking back on that retrospectively and saying, asking that question, where did we fail, right? So there's also the privilege of perspective there as well too. But this is something that is identified as a major failing, according to the biblical witness, a major failing of the tribes of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, especially post David and Solomon, right? And again, according to them, potentially a reason why the kingdom fell apart. And then there are not just divine repercussions, there are social repercussions as well too, which is that we can see the consequences of mistreating the stranger within our midst. We're watching it happen. We're watching the consequences of it right now, which is insecurity in terms of labor supply, condemnation from other nations, And that's on the meta level, but to bring it closer to home, what happens to a church that fails to welcome? You die. You die. You either become so insulated until there's the last 10 true believers, right? And then they die and then the church closes, right? Or you become a church that preaches, exclusion and hatred. Those are the directions you can go. So, and what are the repercussions of failing to be a welcoming family? Strife and discord within your family, right? Has anybody ever had that happen where you had somebody that married somebody else and it caused conflict within the family and you can see the writing. Sorry, Kathy, I wasn't I was not looking your direction. Yeah. And then we'll talk about this next week. Well, we already did talk about this. Next week we're going to move on to the New Testament. But just something to keep in mind, is again, how all of these ideas reflect on different aspects of how we live today. It's not just about immigration, right? It's not just about our immigration laws. It has a lot to do with just who we are as people. And, and I think probably a good thing right now is to pull it back from the national stage and to think about these things, on a smaller stage, which is to think about how we reflect this in our families, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, right? There's not a whole lot that we can control on the national level, aside from, our constitutional rights. But one of the things that I think is important is that no matter what, we have something that we can actually do with it, right? So it's important to think about, when the Bible talks about strangers in our midst, what does that mean for how does our family or our church treat them? When the Bible talks about, how we relate to our immigrant neighbors, right? How does that affect what we do? And then finally, how does this inform the larger perspective of how we just understand and treat people? How we allocate basic dignity to human beings on the whole. So, okay, I should probably go to church. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody. Great conversation today. Sorry if I went off on a long lecture, but